In sports, one of the biggest things is parity. It is important that in any given year, a handful of teams can win the championship. For example, look at the NFL. In any year, a ton of teams could win the Super Bowl. While some people thought the Buccaneers were going to win last year, it was by no means a far-gone conclusion by the time the playoffs reached. This is what makes sporting events such as March Madness so much fun. You have no idea who's going to win. Unfortunately, this idea of parity no longer exists in the NBA. In 2016, Kevin Durant joined the Golden State Warriors, a team coming off of one of the greatest seasons ever, and for the next few years we knew exactly who was going to win the ring. I personally did not pay too much attention to the NBA during this time. We knew exactly who would be in the finals and who was going to win, so what was the point in watching? Then, in 2019, there was a bit of a break. The Warriors dealt with a number of injuries and ended up losing to the underdog Raptors in 6 games. It was during this playoff run that my interest started to rise. There was a historic upcoming free agent class, along with a once-in-a-generation talent in Zion Williamson in the draft. It also was assumed that Durant would leave the Warriors, thus ending their era of dominance. The 2019 offseason was everything that I had hoped for. There were a ton of big moves, and no one was guaranteed a spot in the finals. The 2019-2020 season lived up to the hype. There was finally parity in a team that some predicted to lose in the first round. The Lakers won the championship. Along the way, there were great stories such as the Miami Heat and huge disappointments such as the Los Angeles Clippers. Going into the 2020 offseason, I was the most locked in I'd ever been. While the 2020 offseason was not as eventful as the 2019 offseason, parity was still retained and there were no big issues. Then in January of this year, the Brooklyn Nets traded for James Harden, and with the additions of Blake Griffin among others, parity was lost. Before we start off, it is important to note that unlike the Warriors, the Nets are not guaranteed a ring. They have many injury concerns as well as the fact that they have little defense. With that out of the way, let's talk about the first issue. Super teams only happen in free agent destinations. For example, let's look at the 2 most recent super teams, the Nets and the Warriors. The Warriors were able to draft homegrown talent and become champions. Even before Kevin Durant arrived, the Warriors were coming off a historic season and had come within 1 game of becoming back-to-back champions. I'll give the Warriors credit where it is due. The Warriors were able to use homegrown talent and build from the ground up. However, San Francisco is not a small market. Let's ask a legit question. If the Warriors were in Minnesota with the same players and the same success, would KD have joined them? My guess is probably not. The evidence comes from the second super team, the Brooklyn Nets. The Nets laid the foundation to become great when KD and Kyrie joined in the summer of 2019. Before that, the Nets were coming off a surprising season where they were the 6th seed with a 42-40 record. This was by no means a bad team, seeing as they had a roster that was led by D'Angelo Russell and a strong supporting cast. However, all it took was a team with cap space and a big market to be half decent, and the Nets were able to become finals contenders. Because the Nets were able to build through free agency, they did not have to give up anything and were able to trade their good role players for a star, that being James Harden. Being fair, this issue goes farther than just super teams. The Lakers were able to do the exact same thing. They had a few young pieces in a big market, and though there were years of dysfunction, they were able to sign LeBron James. The Clippers, coming off a season as the 8th seed, were able to sign Kawhi Leonard and Paul George. This whole issue makes it impossible for teams in non-free agent destinations to compete. If your team is in a small market, how are you supposed to compete when at the blink of an eye, a big market team can sign a few stars and form a powerhouse? Another issue with super teams is it ruins the competitive nature of the sport. Let's say you were in the West during the Warriors years. You knew they were guaranteed to make it out of the conference, so what was the point of trying to compete? There's much less of an incentive to make a trade that potentially put you over the hump. Along with this, the season in total is diminished. All the accomplishments that happen are shadowed by the fact that it doesn't matter and you know who's going to win. If you're someone like me who's a sports fan before a basketball fan, then what's the point of watching if you know the end result? In conclusion, everyone's entitled to their own opinion. While I personally hate super teams, some love them. Let me know what you think of these things in the comments, and until next time, peace.